and we may. Thank you, Larry. And I will also take a second to let my colleague Lauren here introduce herself. She was not at the last meeting with us, but is going to be a familiar face going forward. So, Lauren, did you want to?
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm with the consistent same firm that Nick works at. I have some K-12 facilities and design expertise in that energy. Design. I'm from Wisconsin and went to UW-Madison, so excited to kind of come back and be able to work with MPS.
Yeah, thanks so much. And so, yeah, Lauren and I are both in the Chicago office with Perkins Eastman, just a reminder. So, yeah, we'll be likely a familiar duo that you'll see going forward. Lauren, if we want to check and see if we got any responses, a bit of a dorky homework check, if anybody watched, and sorry for the monotone voice generally going forward, it is who I am, but if we look at the poll everywhere just to see, so hopefully folks had a chance to look at the one-pagers that were sent out, as well as the landscape analysis slides and or presentation, if you were able to take a look at those. The idea, a lot of the feedback we got from our first round of steering committee meetings was that we wanted to keep, presentations to a minimum and keep sort of active, engaging work to a maximum. So that was the idea, and it looks like we've got one top answer here, or maybe a couple. So the data about poverty and special ed compared with other districts, awesome. And the higher percentage of SPED students. Yeah, that's great. Glad to hear that was interesting for folks. And then, you're well not to put you on the spot, but I know you were also not with us last time. Did you want to say a quick hello? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Bob Lowe. I'm unemployed. I'm in Marquette University, an artist professor. Started my career teaching at HBCU, which was outside in Alabama. Worked in the education opportunity program in Marquette for many years. I'm kind of a historian of education. We've got family members. My daughter's been 13 years here. My wife's in the homeland work here.
Did you say your wife? Yeah. I have her.
Oh, good.
I just emailed her.
Oh, excellent.
Awesome.
So,
Small world. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and happy to have you. So, great. And I know there's some other new faces. We have other MPS folks in the room. If we want to give a second to just quickly say hello before we jump into everything and start here and work our way around, maybe.
Sure. My name is Nick Sinnerum. I'm the Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services.
I'm Pepper Remote, I'm the manager of talent management and compensation.
My name is Michael Spidell, I work in student services, I'm the manager of enrollment.
Those are all the new faces, yeah. And then we've got the facilities friends in the back, and Michael from Rivera and Associates here as well. So if we want to jump back to the presentation, like I said, we'll keep it light on that. We also want to make sure we give time to make any clarifications that are helpful. And I know we have a lot of wonderful resources in the room with us tonight. I'm really excited to have everyone here. What we'll try to do just in terms of structure, Larry, can we jump back to the PowerPoint? So as we get into, we'll try to get through everything and get to the small group work, which is going to be the vast majority of our time, and try to hold questions within reason till then, just so we can kind of have that breakout session and then have folks float around, answer questions as they come up, or if there are questions that apply to the wider group, like taking a second to hear those. But just wanting to make sure we're able to sort of get to the meat of everything. So, and my clicker works, yes, entirely too well. So hopefully you've seen this already. Quickly going through the sort of admin items. We welcome you. We'll go through the landscape analysis just on a quick breeze in case there were any slides that anyone had a specific question on that you think would be helpful to illustrate for the wider group. And then doing some digging into the district and first region analysis. We got an exciting tool to share with you also. If you were able to bring a machine, I see a few here, that's really great. And you'll be able to use those as we go, and we'll show you that in a second. And then breaking for the small group work, so really wanting to spend the majority of our time sort of digging into what we're seeing both in the wider Milwaukee and within MTS. And then sort of as we discussed last time, using the end of the meeting to try to, based on the conversations that we're having here, come up with some questions potentially that could be useful to share with the wider community. So the way that we're thinking of doing it, rather than creating a new form every month and trying to keep up with an ever-changing link, is just to add sort of a rotating list of select questions to that community insights form so that it's always found in the same spot. And then we just have those like sort of March meeting questions that get added, and we would keep those sort of online until the end of the next month's meeting. So just giving them about a month of airtime for folks to respond. And then we'll just do a look ahead to April. So with the administrative items, one of the pieces at the top, I didn't see any comments on the Google Doc. So the first one is just, hopefully you got the link for the Google Drive and have been able to access the resources. If you're having access issues or you hear of anyone else who might be, please let us know. We want to make sure that you're able to get to that. We also have the meeting notes stored in there. You're welcome to like leave comments on them. We just thought it might be easier if folks want to do it that way. You can also bring feedback here. I know that last month's meeting was rather introductory, so likely, less to sort of misinterpret, hopefully, in terms of what we noted there. But were there any questions or felt like anything needed to be sort of corrected as it related to those meeting notes from last month? Any concerns? Okay, great. We'll just sort of finalize those then and make sure that we get the final version posted to the project website. Hopefully you saw where the recordings are there as well. We're having just making sure we get everybody's bios sort of pulled together. There are a few stragglers across all committees that we're working to just get in. So that will also be added to that project website, and we appreciate your patience on that front. One that I will point out here, I know we still, like the maps that you have in front of you and everything else that's in your binder, the intent is to have all that shared in the Google Drive as well, just so you have a digital copy of it. But yeah, so I've moved through things quickly here. And we do have that shared resource library that everybody should be capable of editing. If you have an article or a book that you want to recommend or anything like that, a video. Any questions on material sharing? Okay, and then the last piece, I know that at the top, we also wanted to factor in any items from the community insights form that we heard specific to this region. We've not gotten anything specific to the East region so far. I know it's obviously early, the questions have been broad, so, but just wanted to speak to that as well. So, last sort of admin note is just the time of year. We are at the time of year where questions are being compiled for the 2025 strategic plan survey. So last spring, we folded questions in about the long range facilities master plan into that survey. The sort of annual survey that goes out, it is large and sort of all encompassing, gets pushed out to students, families, staff, et cetera. So we're working on just pulling together some questions for this year that are going to be more geared towards just making sure, trying to sort of gauge awareness of the project and people's awareness of what's going on and access to resources, et cetera. But we'd love to have you all take a look at those questions and make sure that they make sense and that, we're thinking about it in the right way. So we just wanted to flag that, as we pull that together, we'll plan to share it out with the steering committees so that you have a chance to sort of chime in and let us know if you think there are some adjustments we could make to be more effective on that front. It won't be quite as robust as last year in terms of like, why did you choose the school you did? And, sort of what were what are your perspectives on facilities, which is kind of outlined up here in the second bullet. All right, any administrative questions folks had? So great to see folks coming in. We do have, so just to repeat, we got stuff in the back. I think everybody knows where bathrooms and stuff are, so we'll keep moving. The landscape analysis. I will, as I mentioned, move at a relatively quick clip. I'm not going to explain which on each slide. I'm just going to kind of move through, but if you have a question now that you want to jump to the slide, we can. So just really going over enrollment, market shares of students in the city, how that relates nationally, funding changes. Yeah,
This one, you made a point in your presentation that like, you were clear that this doesn't represent, like, this is how they're funded, but this is just showing how this was changed. So I get that, but like, was vouchers at like 0 before? Like, I have no perspective on like what this really means in the larger scale, so
Okay.
do you have any
No, yeah.
context on that?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And that was the thing, we thought it was tough to try to boil this down, so, but it's important that we give you the full context. So no, the dollar amount per pupil funding was very much not at 0 for
Okay.
other school types. It is a lower amount, but this was just to show, not so much to focus on, what is the per pupil funding for a charter school versus a, MPS versus a choice school. It's more so to say the amount of competition would have increased significantly, but we can look to find some resources that easily explain just kind of how those two compare. I think the ultimate takeaway of this presentation and landscape analysis was more to highlight not necessarily how per pupil funding works for those other school models, but that it is increasing in competition within, outside of the district.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's,
I thought it was interesting, the difference between the 9-12 and the K-8 voucher. And can you say why that number is so different?
In short, no, I cannot say exactly why the high school number is different. There may be some folks in the room who can speak to that better. I don't wanna put anybody on the spot, but in terms of why the high school numbers took a bigger jump, I mean, we can definitely do some digging. I know there was a good amount of media coverage in terms of why that happened, but it definitely increases competition to that point, as you can imagine, at that level a bit higher. Yeah, go ahead.
I may be wrong, but I believe that the special needs voucher was an add-on to the regular voucher. So then, let's say if the voucher for a K was $14.94, if you were a student identified with special needs, then you get the extra kicker.
Get both of them.
Right.
Okay,
Exactly, so it became a money maker for voucher schools.
that's good to know.
Prior to this, the voucher amount for K-8 and high school were identical, and it was, I think I remember it's somewhere around 7,000, between 7,000 and 8,000 per pupil. The impolitic answer as to why the high school went up higher is that they had slightly better lobbyists and complained louder. But also high schools tend to be more expensive. You have different facilities, you have extracurriculars and things like that, so.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and at any point, like if you have context on these questions that come up, please chime in. Like this is not meant to be me preaching to y'all about the information, so thank you so
It's
much.
also hard to certify high school, so you're looking for certified teachers. That's a much
Yeah.
complicated market. And then if you throw in your liabilities such as football.
Right.
Football team will kill you, just a helmet is $500.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They won't have these kind of policies.
All right. So keep going through, but then just highlighting, hopefully folks are familiar with the referendum and just kind of how that impacted the MPS budget and what the outcome was there. So then just giving some details on how the per pupil funding compares to other districts in the metro area, as well as other large districts in the state. It's worth noting, obviously, that MPS is significantly larger than any other district in Wisconsin. And then just sort of the student demographic differences, so going through the economically disadvantaged piece, and seeing where there are similarities between other providers in the city, and then where you see the stronger sort of contrast with students with disabilities instead. Yeah.
No, I was just like, that's the slide that makes me angry every day. Yeah.
But
Yep.
But we don't have good data on voucher schools in this school, is that correct? And that's what you suggested. So it looks like it's almost nothing, which might.
They're for profit, they're not transparent, so you're never gonna get that.
So yeah, there is limited data generally with private choice schools all around. They did have good detail in sort of the source that was linked here, just about if they were to sort of bundle up those SNSP programs as well, that even then the higher end estimate was like 3%, 3.1, so still really quite low.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Two things. One is, in terms of the broader issue of students with special needs, it's worth noting that the special needs voucher program can reimburse reimburses up to 90 or to 100% of the cost of the child's special needs help. Whereas the public schools right now are talking about 30%.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is noteworthy that is hopefully something you might be able to investigate is the fact that disabilities can be speech, can be very limited problems, very extreme problems. And what I've seen historically is that many of the voucher charter schools don't take students who have more severe
Yeah, the costs vary,
Yes.
right, depending on what the disabilities that we're talking about are, in terms of what that student needs in order to have their educational needs met, absolutely. And those are important differences, yeah.
One thing that I'd add to that is that, so does the opportunity for, educational outcome statistics. So if you take if a private school accepts a student that has special needs regarding like speech, that is something that typically you overcome in early grades and that does not impact your educational performance. And so it's a way to then also ensure that they have higher, better looking statistics in terms of
You're
performance.
saying that they pick and choose, huh?
Instead of looking at
One of the drugs.
having a high special ed, I mean, and certainly I have been an MPS teacher, I mean, there are definitely challenges that come along with it, but maybe this is an audience that we have. Maybe this is a strength that we have instead of a negative. And now clearly figuring out the funding for that is a separate question. But it maybe later, or I don't quite understand the trajectory of our whole conversation over this next year, but it might be helpful to have a special ed, the head of special ed come and talk to us about things like how many, you can't separate special, there are rules about how you have to integrate people, and so, what does that composition look like, and how can we think of that as an asset? Because I know that, for example, MPS has multiple spaces for autistic children, and that's I think we do an okay job at that, if not a good job at that. So, I mean, every single time, I don't know, but across the board, that might be something that we can build off of.
Yeah, and I just wanna add to that, I think it's a really salient point to bring up too, like, we're not at all trying to paint this as like a weakness of the school district, more so like from a financial perspective.
Of course.
The challenges that are created, and just the realities within the student body, but yeah, thank you so much. Yep.
Speaking of the financial, so this is mostly, I'm not aware of this, I just know that my home district in St. Louis does this, that if a student who's attending a non-public school requires some special services, whether speech or early interventions on something, they go to the local public school to receive services. And the local public school does not, I don't know how the funding works, but
Except to the gym.
is
And the
it,
other time.
is it
This
a?
will happen here too.
Okay,
Yes.
so kids come to MPS buildings to receive services, but where does the funding come from and where does it go? So there's,
Special ed funding is fixed. and then the
okay,
IDA,
right?
Right, so we're supposed to, like Bob said, we're supposed to get dollar per dollar, we only get 30 cents per dollar.
Okay,
Right, so then let's say Shannon has a child that has a speech impediment. So in the past, before the amount he showed, before the kicker for special ed, Shannon will come into Lincoln Avenue, which was my school. And then the kid will get a team to evaluate the kid there. And then the kid will get a service package, it's called package. So the kid will come 3 times a week, depending on the severity of that. And then we will have to service. And then they'll take it back to the school. So it was like, it's not the burden of the school. Fortunate part is with special education, and I'm reviewing data. We reviewed data this morning with Shannon, and we're looking at, we're making gains in reading, increasing the red, increasing the green. But when we're talking about some schools like, for instance, one that is very attractive, that has 40% special ed, is called Parkside. it's gonna be very, very hard to make sure that Parkside maintains the 3 or 4 level start at the report card, because 40% special ed, right, is going to drag the outcomes. Remember, the performance report card and all of those great reports that come from the feds and the news media takes over in a parade, they don't measure intention. They measure results, base all of their things on results. Yet, we have a wonderful cadre of people that give it in day in, day out to support children with special needs, but yet the results do not show that there's any progress according to those report cards.
I guess I'm piggybacking off of what you said. When I think about what you described as our role as a community steering committee, I think there's a lot of, this is the kind of data that everybody hears, but it really doesn't tell anybody anything in terms of what's the need. Where is it working well and where is it not working well, and what facility needs do we have in order? Because I think to debate, and I hope we don't do that, whether, this whole imbalance of which type of schools have their share of special needs or not, the fact of the matter is MPS does. So the question becomes, in my mind, what's the need? And I think people don't understand. I don't understand it. So I know a lot of the people that I deal with in my community don't understand where it's working well and how to replicate it, if that's the facility's option, and what the cost would be for that, as opposed to trying to figure out based upon imbalances in funding based on school type. I think imbalances based on our children's needs is what I'm most interested in learning what the data is, so we can get to that.
No, yeah, and I do wanna make sure we have time to get into it, and just understanding, there's a lot of different lenses that question can be asked through, right? Like what facilities or buildings are doing well at supporting this, or even schools that are doing well, but the buildings aren't necessarily meeting their needs, so how do we sort of break that down? Did you want to go forward?
So I work in special education. I'm an occupational therapist. I work in schools. I don't work in MPS, but I currently work for a virtual school in California. I worked in Louisiana, and I worked in a bunch of different states. And I just moved back here with my kids. And I think public schools across the nation, right, we're trying to figure out what to do with a smaller pot. But the public schools are having to serve the needs of a lot of the kids that the other schools are saying, we can't meet your needs, and we can say that because we are this specific type of school.
Right.
And so, also as a parent in the public school system, I think that hearing from other parents and why kids send their schools to public school versus a charter versus whatever, is everybody wants the same thing for their kids. Like everybody wants their kids to have the best education they can have, to have a joyful life, to have less pain in their life. And I think if they can choose a school where they feel like their kid has enough resources to do that, that they're making that choice. And I think that it becomes a struggle when there's a limited amount of resources and special education, teachers, therapists, everybody, that pot is shrinking too. And so having these caseloads filled and not having enough resources, and then there's not everybody burning out, essentially. And I think that that's a larger conversation of how to balance it all.
Yeah.
And I think our special education community is definitely an asset. These kids that I work with, they're amazing. They're just as, they're just as important as everybody else.
The students and the teachers though, all the teachers that it takes to have a special ed team, those are extra adults in a building. Which can be helpful, so.
It's a community where the kids learn from each other and then learn how to
I do wanna make sure we have time to break out, and we, not to, close the book on that, but even just to hold our place until we get there, but, really great conversation. So then just showing nationally too, right, the amount of students requiring special education services is on the rise, as well as English learners also going up nationally, really seeing an uptick there. And so, talking about the staffing piece, knowing that there are staffing shortages, and just kind of how those are impacting both schools and the budget implications too, right? So while, as I mentioned, filling vacancies is great, it also really highlights the importance of sorting out financial challenges and making sure that that's, yeah.
I know you're trying to move along, but the increase in special education diagnoses, or like in the school-based system, I saw like, as a practitioner, like a huge increase with after COVID, when kids who can't read, and also kids with like social emotional designation.
Yep.
Because they, just that, like, the mass trauma that our kids went through, and it's.
Yeah.
I think it really comes out in special education.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, just the national trends on staffing, so pointing out one difference there too with MPS, knowing that, you know, the sort of teachers per 100 students is actually at a lower rate than a lot of other districts in the state. So that may be a point of contrast actually, and harkens to maybe like, you know, where other districts might be looking at how to potentially shed staff, or not to use the word shed, but like reduce, however you want to say it. That's not necessarily going to be the easiest solution or most applicable option in this sense, or at least, and I don't think anything we're talking about in terms of budget reduction or anything, it's like, there's no one size fits all, it's not a single path. But just wanting to highlight that difference in the data. So the special education funding, hopefully you watch this, it's quite interesting to see how those gaps are covered. And just seeing like, when you look at those gaps and how they're spread out, so that 155 million unfunded amount was basically, you know, that is taken out of the per pupil funding that exists otherwise to cover that gap. And then you have less dollars per student that is going to general education as well. So how that impacts districts differently.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
This is super helpful. Can we see something similar like to this next time? That shows how much money is principal discretionary funding, because that's the funding that actually gets supplies in classrooms, gets clubs, puts the bells and whistles on all of it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I don't wanna say the number, because the number that I remember was shockingly low, of how much was actually going to, and I think that this is part of that, is that, you know, big chunks of what normally would go to the discretionary funding are being used to do our legal mandates for our special ed community, but I'd love to see how much principals actually get, per building.
Yeah.
You know, on average, like what that looks like for people.
Okay, yeah, Nick, I don't know how easy of an answer that is, but.
I mean, I can just add some context that we, for discretionary, well, there's grant and then there's grant funding that also some principals do have discretion over. As our like local revenues, we provide $5,000 per pupil. That is at the principal's discretion, how to deploy that. And then in addition, there are funds that we come in for grant funding for what we call AGR and title. And those also have a kind of discretionary component, but $5,000 per pupil is a pretty good rule of thumb.
Can you say you said 8 letters, ATR or something?
AGR,
Can you say what that is?
it's achievement gap reduction.
Oh,
Sort of like Sage.
It's the,
Got it.
it's the new stage,
Got it.
it's the rebranding.
Okay, that's right.
Nick, can you clarify something for us, is that $5,000 discretionary, that's what they're using to pay for their staff and all the other things, right?
Well, so it is, yes, it is
Yes.
how they are paying for staff, the staff that they have discretion over. Now, our board has chosen, in order to like ensure equitable access to like art, music, and Phi-Ed, for example, we do provide centralized funding of staff. So there are other exceptions to the rule, but that is correct, though, that 5,000 per pupil is not just buying like supplies or equipment, it's paying for
The 8th grade teacher.
an 8th grade teacher,
Yes.
exactly.
It's not special ed would be centralized like art, music, Phi-Ed.
Correct.
Discretion, the word discretionary covers their entire budget
Yeah.
versus what might be left over after they got that budget figured
Yes,
out.
yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So to throw something in the mix, what about referendum funding? Like, I'm a music teacher, 80% of technically my position was supported by the referendum from a few, right before COVID. So how does that figure into the mix with the 5,000 per pupil? Is this on top of that so that I can be full-time at my school instead of 0.2?
So unfortunately, that's a very complicated
Okay,
answer.
sorry.
No, that's all right.
I was throwing
I can,
something.
there's exceptions to everything that I'm gonna say probably, and then exceptions to those exceptions. For the 2020 referendum, we tracked that additional revenue separately in our budget. And so that typically is, like you mentioned, our music and Fayette, that was heavily supported by the 2020 referendum. And so that would be on top of, or like centrally funded. We have three pots of money. We have our school-based spending, we have centrally funded school supports, and then we have offices. And so that would be like a centrally funded school support that does supplement their discretionary, and although not, they don't always have total discretion over that, understanding they need to like fill classrooms. And so that is true for the 2020 referendum. However, for the 2024 referendum, the district was not in a place to really add additional services. So that was not tracked separately. That is kind of just mixed into the pot. It's also important to know that that 2020 referendum continues to be inflated away each year. And so there are new referendum, the 2024 referendum funding has to supplement, continuing to support those centralized supports that were added into the 2020 referendum. Hope that helps in that instead of muddying the water.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. So then, the last section here, just from the analysis, was just about the number of schools that MPS is operating generally, and showing over, since '94, enrollment has gone down by almost 30%, with buildings decreasing in volume only by about 4%, and sort of seeing similar trends nationwide. So, nationwide, seeing more district schools operating actually, even as enrollment continues to decline. So really sort of forecasting some tough financial decisions that are on the horizon for school districts all over. The next piece, before we get into it, Lauren, if you want to pull up the reason we asked you to bring machines, if you have them, which is great if you did. If not, don't worry, like this is something you can also do at home, but we have a sort of data dashboard that we built that is broken out to give some regional perspectives on some of the data, which is newer because we haven't, we have been focusing on school board districts a lot if you've been following us from the start, and really trying to make sure that that's as applicable to you all as possible. So Lauren is working to pull that up, but basically we'll give you a quick preview of how to use it, and then as we get into that small group work, we'll share the link so that you can access it yourself and sort of dig into it. We're having technical woes. Sweet. So this is the dashboard. It's a lot of charts all at once. So we'll go through them in the slides. I won't explain each one here, but and if you want to drop up to the top left, you can see filter by regions. You can actually look at any of the regions as well as the entire district with all regions. And then the other interesting and sort of cool part is selecting a school at the bottom right under that. So once you've selected a region, you can filter by a school. So picking a school within your region. We're still standing this up, so this will get cleaner and sort of making sure that it's as easy as possible to navigate, but we wanted to share it as soon as possible so that you had a chance to really dig into it. But as you pick a school like Bayview there, you can see some enrollment trend history there, as well as some data points up top. Sorry, it's hard for me to see from this angle. And we're trying to get attendance areas in there where they apply as well, just to see where students are coming from who are attending those schools. So really trying to give you as much as possible to help understand and sort of work through what those individual trends are and how they sort of scale up to the regional and the district-wide level. So, Lauren, if you want to jump back to the presentation, I promise we'll share this with you in a bit here as we break out in case it's helpful. I also, you will be able to take it home, so we'd love for you to connect with one another while we're here. Not to just go down the rabbit hole on it with the data dashboard, but so just quickly going through some of this stuff, just district-wide trends. Hopefully you've seen this chart before, but just showing the decreasing enrollment that does, obviously predates a lot of the other charts that you'll see on that dashboard, go back to like 2014, 2015. And then seeing the sort of decline from the pandemic, but without having that full range, it can kind of paint a different picture. So just showing the decline that's been happening over time.
And again, that's just traditional enrollment. That doesn't include the charters.
Correct. This is MPS enrollment only. Yes.
Yeah, but MPS also has charter enrollment?
This does include, sorry, this does not include like non-instrumentality
Okay,
charters,
there we go.
but it does include instrumentality charters.
Gotcha.
I beg to differ, but 14% from 97,000 to 59,000, I think like nobody.
14% is from 14-15 to 23-24. So it's 19% here, 14% here, and 11% there.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point. We should put the total amount on there, like that. So then, digging into the East enrollment, region enrollment, so over that same time span, it's been a 13% decline in enrollment, so very similar to what the district is seeing overall. I'm just noting that the East region, so I'm not gonna put like a ton of stats and like bullet points on these, really just wanting to show you sort of what the charts are that are on that tool and how to sort of interpret them. Did you have a question? Is that a hand? Okay, great. So yeah, making up about a quarter of the enrollment.
I do have a question about that. Does that include the high schools in the East region?
Oh, that is a good question, and I believe it does, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll double check myself on that, but I'm 90.
But then our regions are geographical,
This is East region from a geographic standpoint, so we have split up we have basically dissolved the high school region for intents and purposes in this with the data that we're looking at, just because it didn't, we're looking purely from geographic sense, so there was not a perfectly neat and clean way to do it, and we're hoping this is the least confusing.
So how far west do you go? Because East region would be Bayview High School.
Yep,
And then
Bayview's
you
in there.
say north as well.
Riverside.
North, like
Well-
north of King would be in there.
So, and all that'll be showing on this,
So
yeah.
it's-
We
yeah,
also have the maps, thank you.
it's on the dashboard.
Maps there, and we have gigantic versions behind you on the walls.
Oh, great.
I don't know, maybe you have a chart, but how does this compare with other regions?
That is a great question that the data dashboard can pull in. We are just comparing to the district versus this region, but yeah, and that's why we wanted, like, we know that we don't have enough time to get through everything, so we want to really try to give you as much as possible to work with.
And then we can play with it and.
Yeah, so speaking quickly to grade level configurations and just highlighting, so one of the things you'll see as you dig into that dashboard is that we've started to split things up by school level, grade level configuration, excuse me, so like elementary, middle, high school, K-8. And so those 4 groupings is kind of how we sort of consolidated them for this simplicity of data and not having 10 different data points for these various different school sizes. We do think it's important to point out that MPS has a large variety of different grade level configurations, which, does create its own list of questions and like challenges that could be coming from that. But we didn't want to pretend like there were no in-betweeners as we get to data like this, which each one of these lines represents, so yellow is K-8, green is high schools, orange is elementary schools, and blue is middle schools. There is a legend at the top, it is just very small, which is why I wanted to read that for you. But this is just showing sort of the trends district-wide, so what you're seeing here, and really like, again, with that sort of pandemic time, where that steeper drop starts to happen, you can see that some of the drops were like with elementary school was already gradually happening well before, whereas like high school was at a more stable point prior to that. So that's district-wide, and then digging into the East region, you'll see K-8s at the top, having that sort of steeper drop. High schools, less steep, and then, middle schools are generally, there's a lot fewer middle schools, as many of you probably know. MPS has a lot of K-8s at this point.
You're trying to move really quickly, but one of the points, since we're talking about, losing folks and trying to figure out how to keep them around.
Yep.
That was on the people, data page, is that we're losing most of them in the transition to 6th grade, AKA middle school.
Right.
But when I had access to larger pools of data, my memory was that the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade was also a huge space where we lost a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the chart on your people page is it highlights that it includes people who didn't finish or who are repeating 9th grade. So I'm just wondering, is that, my understanding is that those transition points and the MPS, and I'm not saying we should change this, but the MPS procedure to get into certain high schools, I don't know that that's common. So it feels like, I mean, it feels like you're trying to get your kid to college.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So,
as a
so if, I'm wondering if that's one of the space, you know, those transition spaces are places where some work could be done to retain people.
Yes, and you are like 2 steps ahead of where we're going with it. No, it's great, with the discussion questions too, and like kind of some of the things that we wanted to sort of seed for those conversations. Just looking, these charts are also on the page. This is not necessarily new data, but just showing the sort of widespread nature. I know we looked at this briefly last time. So digging into it on a regional level, seeing just sort of how those show up. So again, seeing sort of a widespread enrollment declines, where there are a few that stand out as gaining enrollment over the last 5 years. So this is a 5-year stretch, not since 2014-15. So definitely important to pay attention to the graph titles there. But and I think it's like 3 or 4 of the schools that are increasing are Montessori, and there are a lot of unique characteristics to point out about a lot of them, where schools may be expanding a grade level and it shows up as like, oh, the enrollment's booming, but really they are just growing a new grade every year because the structure of their school changed. So there is not enough time for us to get into every specific one, but like it is important to note that like there are reasons for some. I can't say there are reasons as clear for all, but just wanting to point that out. So last thing we did was just to try to look at, okay, based on sort of grade level configuration and school type with elementary, middle, high school, and K-8, sort of where do they fall from a size of school standpoint? So this is district wide, and what you're seeing across the bottom is 0 to 200 students, and this is based on enrollment, not on capacity. So this is how many students are actually enrolled at the school in 2023.
So we can't tell under enrollment necessarily from this.
You can't tell.
You can't tell under enrollment based on this.
Right, you couldn't necessarily tell that, but you could maybe imagine, unless there are likely not schools, let me rephrase that, there are less schools that have enrolled, like utilization capacities of 200 or less, right?
Oh, okay.
Like
Gotcha,
it's unique
gotcha.
for, and those are usually like a specialty program, like
Yeah.
there are, alternative schools that have stuff like that, whereas, and then you've got like the vast majority here falling in the 200 to 400 range. This last one is 1,000 to 3,000, so the really large schools. And just seeing how those are spread out. So you can see that most of MDS's schools are elementaries and K-8s, and they fall into those 2 first bars. Yeah.
Okay, so as this relates to facilities.
Yeah.
In terms of capacity, do we have a number or a chart that actually looks at the buildings of what the building capacity would be or is or could be?
Yes, so
That relates to this.
we have building capacity that is for each school. And if you use, I know we have like a ton of different resources, the exploration tool, that is one of the side links on the project website. You can look up by any school and see their capacity, their enrollment, and then it calculates utilization. It also shows like projected enrollment, projected utilization as a result. So we are still working to like get everything out to y'all to try to make it in that, like, so keep an eye on that Google folder, please. We want to keep dumping stuff into there to really try to give you as much information and sort of visibility as possible.
Will you guys be redoing your projections, considering the terrible landscape that we're finding ourselves in?
That's a good question. I think, yes, I mean, the district does their own projections that get updated. And like, as we go, we're working, I think it's important to note, we keep referring to the 2023-24 data, like obviously the data is changing as the years pass. We are building these tools where they're relatively easy to update so that we can plug in that new information and sort of work off of that. But yeah, the idea is to not have a static set so that if we look at this in 2 years, we're like, great, we're still operating off 23-24 enrollment data. We want to make sure that with dashboards and things like that, that they're really easy to keep populating and changing. Because yeah, it is a ever-changing landscape for sure, to say the least. So this is the East region, just how it's split out, and you'll see like a strong amount of K-8s in the East region, especially falling into those sort of 2 middle buckets, which is similar to the district-wide, but also pointing out just the concentration of elementary schools. There are a couple really small ones, and I believe those high schools that are falling into the small ones is Project Stay and
Alliance.
Thank you. And again, all this data you can dig into on the tool. I want to make sure we get time to go back, so I can happily jump back to any of these. The last thing I want to point out, just because, and I was hoping this feature would be fully functional, but on that dashboard, if you saw, we're showing the attendance area piece. So this is also on the website, but just wanting to highlight how few students are coming from, are attending their sort of attendance area neighborhood school. And so those are very low numbers, right? So in contrast, we're in Chicago, we're hearing a lot about, the mayor and CPS really putting a lot of effort into bringing neighborhood schools back. And for context and comparison, like they're at 56% of their elementary students go to their neighborhood school already, and 25% of their high school students go to their neighborhood school. So like, they're not quite as drastic as this, and they're trying to move things back. That is not to say like everything should, like from Chicago applies here, so please don't interpret it that way, but just for some context.
How long has it been like this?
A long time.
Okay.
Cause I think that might be the other apples to complex, because I'm gonna assume, and I'd love to see the data, that Chicago didn't have as far to go to get to a 56 number, because maybe there was a higher percentage all along. I don't know.
56, actually, it's been going down. So
Oh, it's going down,
56 is
so
the
it's even
lowest it's
higher.
been at for a while.
See,
Yeah.
that's the difference between us then, because I
Yeah.
think we've been probably more like this.
Yeah, and they're more
Yeah.
expanding, like they've been moving sort of falling away from the neighborhood model at a slower rate,
Oh,
whereas like to that point, MPS has been here a longer time. But
so the
But
point,
it's segregation of that. I'm sorry.
I guess I feel like if we're gonna, among things, think about whether there should be some sort of initiative that said, let's do a plan that says we should go more toward that. An example somewhere else where they've actually said they're gonna do that, and how they got there, given our background, would be helpful, to know, is that just like whistling Dixie, or is it even
Right.
possible to, you know what I mean? 'Cause
yeah,
I like
duly
it.
noted. No, and trust me, we could spend an entire meeting looking at how other districts are handling similar
Yeah.
challenges, and we're trying to think about the best way to do some of that, because we definitely want to spend time looking at other districts, but we just, are trying to think about how to do it strategically. So for now, getting into the small group work, yay. And fun photos throughout. So this is the QR code for that data dashboard. This is the URL if you don't have a camera, or I don't know how mobile friendly it is, so definitely computer is gonna be your best bet. We are building these tools custom for MPS. This is not, we're not a software company, but we wanna make sure, and in the spirit of like, we want this to be something you can continue to use. It's not like trying to sort of lock people into a contract for a SaaS tool, but so this is the time breakdown. Initially we have that much time. I want to give you all as much as we can, but just the objectives. So speaking to these, I think it's important. So I'll read through them really quickly, but the idea is to really just like dig into some of these issues. So one of the norms and expectations, which are in your binders now, or if you grabbed it at the back, we compiled those. So if you have any thoughts on that, happy to discuss after, but really like, accepting non-closure, like I don't think the goal is to come to a solution here. We're not meant to say like, great, we figured out how to fix
We did
X, Y, and Z. But really just expanding like that shared knowledge base of like, and turning over stones that maybe we haven't turned over before. And what are some potential policy initiatives that could be explored, or anything along those lines, like really trying to wrap our heads around, so that, like when we move into those conversations around prioritization and, strategic identification and implementation and all those things, and really letting rubber meet the road, like we are coming into it very informed with like a lot of hopefully tools and data at everybody's sort of in their pocket to help inform those conversations. So I just don't want anyone to think we're meant to get it all done now. I can leave that for a second. Sorry, that's how you send a photo or give them a QR. But yeah, so small groups, basically, we will probably have somebody come and sit with y'all who's gonna try to, from our team, Michael, Laren, and some of the MPS folks, just to try to jot down as much as we can. Bob and Jay, I don't know, since
I
we're
was
smaller, if
thinking-
y'all
yeah,
wanna come over here, we can do 2 groups. Awesome. And so then we have some questions on the next page, just to help start discussion. You do not need to answer every question. You do not need to go in order. It is meant to be like like we ask that you stay in the arena of enrollment, budget, and staffing, and not go completely off onto a different topic, but I can read these. I know the text isn't huge, so feel free to take a picture and zoom in if you want, but, so what factors do you think are driving school selection trends in your region? And really focusing on East Region, right? Like, we want to understand what those unique, and nuances are within the East Region. And what additional data or info could help identify why families are choosing or not choosing MPS schools. How MPS can more effectively attract and retain students, what are barriers that families face? So Rebecca, I know that was something you mentioned, and just like the challenges of 8th graders getting into high schools, enrollment trade-offs between larger and smaller schools. So, you know, what is afforded to larger schools that smaller schools might not have, and how MPS could approach school size to try to best support students and use this resources effectively. One piece with number 4 we want to speak to, I know we, like in the landscape analysis, talked a lot about competition with other education providers outside of MPS, but there's also, you know, I think with the budget piece, competition within MPS, right? Like in that funding that is tied to students and how that sort of shows up. So the unintended consequences of having the enrollment-based funding, and where it kind of creates some of those friction points. So how to balance like equitable school funding, but also sustainability and keeping schools well-resourced and not having sort of people get into a trap of declining resources where you just can't get out of that hole. So it's a lot of words, I know, but it's meant to sort of inspire stuff. And then lastly, just policy considerations. So we definitely, if something comes up on that, naturally, great, take it where you will. We'll be floating around to help answer any questions. If you have questions, please raise a hand. We have wonderful resources in the room, and like, we want to answer the questions and provide the details that you're looking for. So I'll stop talking. Yeah, and get started. I'm gonna turn the recording devices off. And so, yeah, sorry, I didn't speak to this. Here I am talking again. On the last bit, we'll give you some time to do small group discussion and then a few minutes to sort of share out with the other group, like what were the takeaways from the conversation, answer any questions the other group might have for you based on those sort of report outs, and we'll turn the recordings back on for that part.
allied, building alliances,
All
your,
right.
your.
I used to
your-
teach that class online.
No, I love it, yeah.
Yeah, Michael used to be my kid.
That was exciting.
So, sounds like some really great conversations happening. Really appreciate y'all letting me, sort of wind things down a bit. But yeah, we want to, if you want to designate someone from your group, sorry, I meant to say that before we wound down, but, if you want to draw straws or however it goes, but someone who's willing to just kind of give us a quick couple-minute rundown of the key highlights of what you covered, if it was specific to one of the questions, and what are some of the ideas you might be talking about or challenges, what have you. I don't want to, put too many parameters on it, but yeah, would love to hear from one group or another. So anybody feel inspired to start from either group? Man, that was a quick hush. Really went 180 there.
Okay, I took some notes.
Awesome. Thank
So
much.
you all can
Laura.
jump in. So we only got 1.5 questions. Okay, two and a half, all right.
We did pieces
So,
of most of that.
Question one, we loved. So we talked a lot about possible trends in things that could be both a draw and a deterrent. Curriculum, programming, word of mouth, people you trust, relatives, information doesn't move people as much as we like to think. It's not test scores that draw people to school, kids, events, safety, transportation, before and after school care. Those were just some of the highlights. Question two, how can MPS more effectively attract and retain? Some of this, I put my own thing in, but access to opportunity was a big one. All kinds of opportunities, open doors, not close them. Class size, I threw that in. Sense of belonging, that was a big one, especially from K4 all the way till you're done. And having that sense of belonging, not only with your teachers, but with the people you go to school with. And can I say it, breaking the box and getting rid of decentralized competition model.
Yeah.
And that's all I typed. I know we talked about another one, so.
No, yeah. that's
Well, we
great.
talked about,
Response to 4.
yeah, number 4 being the, when we talk about enrollment-based funding model, it becomes difficult to have equity of opportunity when we have so many schools that are so low in enrollment. And that it might be easier to do that if we had the same number of students, but in fewer school buildings.
And you took the savings from maybe not having all those school buildings and you used it to distribute among the schools so that they could have better offerings.
Right. Fewer schools with greater resources within.
Yeah, don't send it to central.
Yeah,
send it
and we did talk about how, if we are going to make some closures, that we frame it not as you don't have enough students, but rather your students don't have access to enough resources.
Right.
And so making it more about increasing opportunities for students rather than, shutting people down.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Yeah, did you have a question?
I wonder, this is an ask.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can help us out with the composition of city children in the last decade. And I would say that because if we look at reasons why families leave us, I know for a fact that the number of Hispanic families and Hispanic children in the city have grown tremendously, right? And I know for certain that the voucher program is not called a voucher, it's sold as a scholarship. So like a privilege to come to the school.
Yeah.
And remember, when you come from third world countries, and I came from one, so I'm talking for experience, going to a Catholic school, St. Joe Blow, whatever, is very prestigious. So then, that may lie your answer about enrollment, because truly, I get to see children that I taught go to church and get indoctrinated to come to the school, right?
Yeah,
So-
no, the language
So
matters.
I wondered about the makeup of city children, and that will lie your
Demographics of
answer about
students.
what market to approach.
Yeah, we can look into that. Were there any specific questions for this group based on anything they mentioned? From what we'll call Group A and Group B? Any questions from Group B? Group A? All right, who from Group B would like to share out? Just kind of some of the key takeaways or key discussion points y'all had.
Okay, I think that we talked a little bit about like what attracts people to my school. But I don't think that is necessarily what attracts people to all the schools across the district. Clement Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know that that was a significant part of our conversation. I think
You talked
something,
about the funding and the.
well, we talked about, which was a little more, you know, maybe not a popular conversation. I think it was kind of popular
No,
here.
share the idea.
But I think that it's.
What was
always-
it? What was
It
it?
is that,
Sorry, guys in the
higher
back,
need
can you?
schools,
Higher needs.
schools that have students that have higher needs, more trauma, just, you know, just need more support. Those schools' staff should be paid appropriately. And schools that maybe tend to have a whole lot less issues, a lot less disruptions, a lot less trauma, maybe don't get paid as much.
Yeah.
Make it incentivized to be at a more challenging school.
Yeah.
Because it's challenging.
Yeah.
And my whole career has been challenging school after challenging school, and I feel like I've been put out to pasture, and I'm okay with that. But I'm just saying, I see a huge difference between Clement and Roosevelt, Lincoln Center of the Arts, Hartford, even Elm. It like drastically different needs and the stressors, and like these staff just give blood, sweat and tears, and they make the exact same amount of money as my really awesome staff at my current school,
Yeah.
who I'm not taking anything away from, but God, what they could do over in a more challenging school to like really rock
Yeah.
our population.
Well, and there's precedent for that, right? There are other districts that have had pay structures that are set up based on the schools that they're in. So, I mean, we can find some of those resources just to share and see how they, like, top of my head, I don't know the outcomes
Dallas.
after a long term. Dallas
Dallas,
ISD,
Texas.
okay,
And just real quick,
yeah, please.
their model is that they actually incent the best and brightest, if you will, to go into the most challenging
Schools with the greatest needs.
So it might be vacation, it might be, it's not just, you know, you get this much more money.
Right.
But they're incented to, because they're needed based on the needs of the kids, you know what I mean?
Beautiful.
So.
Yeah.
And I said, as a principal, I would be willing to, I think it's reasonable to say that Hartford should, as a principal, or Carver as a principal, should get paid more than I do.
Gotcha.
But I want it to be universal.
No, I think that's.
I'm not
really-
personally just taking the cut, I'm just saying, I'm willing to,
Understood.
or I'm willing to go for a more challenging position, knowing that I'm being compensated in some way,
Yeah,
maybe not on
accordingly.
the paycheck, but in other ways.
Sure, that makes perfect sense, and that is a lot of the reason why, you know, people are changing jobs as education professionals going to different districts anyway, so acknowledging it and sort of working it into the playbook. Any other discussions that we're having at this table that we want to mention just before we wrap up here? All right, and no pressure, I know we've got notes and stuff too, so we'll move quickly through the rest of it. The community insights piece, so we had thought that there may be a run out of time, and we really did want to maximize the time that you all had to speak with one another. So what we can do here is we want you to think about just kind of the conversations that we had today, and what are some questions that might be helpful to pose to the wider, you know, stakeholder groups, your constituents, that would help inform the process, right? Like a question that can be posed in a broad sense. You can enter it now on this QR code. This is the same one as when you entered. So if you did our welcome activity of what was your favorite part of the homework, you can also just go back to that same site, just refresh, and it'll have the new question on there. I toggled it on. Otherwise, we can put the question in the follow-up, you know, post-meeting survey, and you can submit an answer that way. I just know that we're short on time, so for now, we'll do both, just so we don't miss anybody. And we'll see how it works out. We're still sort of figuring out the best way to do all these things, and we appreciate your patience. As I was mentioning, we're only like the first group that goes every month, and yeah, so but yeah, we'd love to get your thoughts. So we'll try to pull together and kind of like we did with the norms and expectations, consolidate some of those questions into what makes sense as those key few, and fold them in for like the sort of enrollment budget and staffing focused questions for the month that you can then push out. The last piece I will mention, we're working on pulling some additional resources to share with you. We'll send them out in a Google folder. We do have like a one pager that we pulled together that is gonna be like a flyer of like what we talked about at this meeting, what we're talking about at the next meeting, which I believe is right here, and that will be transportation and programming. So digging into that, a lot to dig into there, and just like how that's digging into the project. Some of that we looked at today with the programs and sort of the grade level configurations. It's also more related to like how a school might be programmed, so there's some overlap for sure. You'll notice that as we go on. But yeah, so we'll continue to send emails out. You may have noticed like starting to send emails from my work email, and then Laren as well, probably at some point. So if you see our emails bouncing around, the info at MPS facilities plan is proving a little glitchy, and we want to make sure that you get everything. And also my last name changed, so if you saw, it's Connie Kramer now. That is not a fake make, that is me. So either my old email still works, I'll still get them all, you'll just only receive them from me, from Connie Kramer. All right, and I think that is it. So just next steps are like the little to-dos, but we'll send out that follow-up survey. We'll try to get it out a little bit quicker this time. It'll be a lot of the same. We want to know how we can make these meetings the best and most effective for you all. So we do read every response, like thank you for sharing. And just how we can sort of modify our approach.
Elephant in the room.
Please.
How will lead infiltrate this work?
Yeah.
Yes, that is the way for, so, yeah, go ahead.
So I would say, you know, I think it's gonna be one of those factors that we'll look at, obviously, you know, it's in the forefront. So I think once we get down to the part where we're talking about the facilities, I think we'll have a much better framework, you know, for that conversation. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than some of the other issues we have with our facilities too, right?
Yeah,
Right.
and
It's all a part of the
there's a
decision.
financial implication that comes with it as well, but, and just to give a May look ahead as well, the intent as of now is to have that May meeting be focused on the buildings.
Okay.
And so we'll talk transportation and programming, and then we'll move into sort of where it all literally fits in, yeah.
With that May meeting, will it include things like cleanliness of the buildings? Do we get to talk about that?
That's a good question. We haven't really
Can we add that?
had data on cleanliness,
Oh, okay.
but yeah, no, we can,
Like, I'll
yeah.
send you an email.
hey, yeah.
Since I have shared with some of my network people that I'm on this, they have been sharing me, and it's mostly having to do with cleanliness
Yeah.
of the building. So, and things like storage and things like that, but some of the things are, you know, health concerns, and
For
it's
sure.
not lead, it's
Yeah.
something else, so.
Yeah, and I think there's some qualitative information on cleanliness, like where people have responded to surveys.
Well, you know, dust from mice and stuff.
Yeah, and so,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you all so much. Happy to hang around if anybody had any final questions just for a minute or two, but, feel free to grab those materials. We'll get the one pager shared out, and yeah. Great to see you all. Thank you so much.
Hey, Nate,
Yeah.
question for you. Can you ask about changing the meeting?
Oh, yes, the changing the meeting time.